I approach this issue of, progressive prosecution is that in a lot of my work, I argue that I don't think that they exist, frankly. I don't like the term. I view it with a great deal of suspicion, in that I think that it has grown so malleable, and so many people have just taken it and run with it, and they say, well, I'm a progressive prosecutor because I follow, Brady, or I don't do anything that's not unconstitutional. I don't do unconstitutional things. I'm like, okay, great. You are doing things that are minimally required of you, but I guess we've gotten so used to prosecutors violating rules that we somehow think that that's progressive. So, I see that there is a use for it, and I understand why people like the term. To some extent, I'm a little bit of a polemicist, and I push against it. I'm like, okay, how do we start reconfiguring in our heads what really is progressive? And that I don't want us to settle for something that we could improve more, is what I get really worried about. So, I come to this distinction of, okay, I don't really like, this concept of progressive prosecution, especially because, oftentimes the way we think of the job, and a lot of people who say that they're progressive, it's still usually a very backward looking job. It's like, and that's what sort of rubs me the wrong way about it, in that, okay, how is it necessarily progressive when a lot of what we're doing necessarily is just responding and reacting to something that someone has done? So it's also a contradiction in terms in my own head that way. And when I mention that, what I want to do is really get people thinking, well, what can we do to actually make things better in the future? Okay, if she doesn't want us to only just be reacting, then what can we do proactively and actually be progressive about things? And we'll get to discussing that, I think later in the program too, like, okay, what exactly can we be doing to make things actually progressively in the future better. And that's something that I want to have us start taking steps toward. Something else that really worries me too about the term progressive as well is that I just don't think it'll fly in some jurisdictions. I think, if you're in a jurisdiction where it works and it's actually of benefit to you, then that's great. You should, even apart from my theoretical objections, you should go ahead and use it. If that's what people are politically attuned to, great. But I can think of a number of jurisdictions, the one that I practiced in, where if I said, hey, I'm a progressive prosecutor and this is what I'm doing, they'd be like, get out of here. We don't want anyone who's labeling themselves such because it connotes a certain political bent. So I think that, it's important to remember that a lot of these things that we're advocating for, a lot of these changes that we're thinking about, can really be packaged in ways that are, politically, for lack of a better way, putting it appetizing across the board. And that's something to really be mindful of depending on where you're at, and, something that you've got to be really thinking about and skilled about to try to make these issues work, because you might run into some resistance saying, oh, it's so radical and so progressive or something like that. I know that when I was practicing in Rich County, if I ever used language like that, no thanks. But if I packaged it in by way of saying that it was, fiscally conservative, save the county this much money, and, you saw less recidivism this way or something, then people were willing to listen. So keep that in mind, when you're trying to figure out how to maybe package the way you're talking about these different changes that hopefully you want to make in your offices. But those are my main objections. But I want to clarify, I do see why practically it has some use. I just want to really try to shift our conception of what exactly that means, by sort of engaging in this polemic, I guess.